us today Céline Cousteau. And so Céline is a humanitarian and an environmental activist working with a variety of mediums that range from documentaries to art, from consulting with corporations and foundations to public speaking. Each form shares the same message of interconnectivity between humans and the natural world. As a documentary film director, producer, and presenter, Céline is the founder and executive director of Cause-Centric Productions, which creates impactful, cause-focused content. In 2015, Céline co-founded the Outdoor Film Fellowship with a vision of passing on her family legacy of cause-focused filmmaking. The OFF is a nonprofit program whose mission is to empower the next generation of filmmakers, creatives, and activists to inspire change through leadership, film, and the arts. Céline is also the ambassador of the Tread Right Foundation and is on the board of the National Aquarium in Baltimore. Her previous work has included being guest designer for Swarovski at, I fumbled that, but that's okay.
That's pretty good.
A member of the World Economic Forum Council on Oceans with a degree in psychology and a master's in intellectual relations. Céline is fluent in 3 languages. And so Céline is going to talk a little bit about the Tribes on Edge today. And this is Céline's first feature documentary. So the film follows Céline as she returns to the Brazilian Amazon after a fateful email from Beto. The Marubo tribe beckons her back to help tell the people's stories. Céline ventures into the heart of the jungle to explore the health crises and threats to land and human rights of the indigenous peoples of the Vale. You might have to help me here, Céline.
Do Jarari.
Yeah.
You could say Jarari, that works.
Okay, expanding the view to how this is relevant to our own lives, from the history of invaders bringing devastating diseases, all the more relevant in our current global pandemic, to the ongoing illegal activities, including hunting, gold mining, and deforestation, to the alarming dismantling of all protection of their land and human rights by the Brazilian government.
You're muted.
Yeah, so much more than a narrative of tribal reality in the Amazon. The film provides a perspective on how our future is interwoven with theirs and with nature. The indigenous communities are fighting to protect their home, critical to the ecological balance of our planet, and as a result, they protect us. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Céline, and I'm really excited to hearing and listening to Céline. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and I'm really happy to be here and share this story, which just before we went and opened up the group, we were just saying how many parallels there are between this story and your own story and what happens actually around the world, and the destruction of environment, the destruction of human life, the lack of care for Indigenous peoples' sovereignty and land rights. I first started going to the Amazon when I was 9 years old. My grandfather was doing an expedition there, filming a documentary over the course of more than 18 months. And I had the opportunity to fly down, spend a couple of weeks aboard his ship and travel. And it was obviously a very unique experience coming from a little girl growing up between the United States and France. But my family was a family of travelers, of explorers, of filmmakers. And so it didn't seem so foreign to me to be going to this territory and to this region. I didn't understand at that time how important that moment would be in my life and how much of a connection it would create with that region and that ecosystem, and eventually with the people that inhabit the rainforest. So that was in the early 1980s. In 2006 and 2007, I started working with my father on documentary films, and one of those was called Return to the Amazon, which was going back to places my grandfather had been to in the early 80s. So as well, going back to places I had been to as a 9-year-old. And that was when I, amongst many other places, visited the Jarari, the Vale do Jarari Indigenous territory in the Brazilian Amazon. I'm going to ask if you can just pull the first slide up, because I think this is a saying probably a lot of people are very familiar with. Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. all things are bound together, all things connect. It's from the 1800s by Chief Seattle. This saying for me really represents everything. The interconnectivity of everything on the planet, all of the species, including ourselves, all of the different ecosystems, the energy that gets passed. And I didn't discover this this exact phrase until very recently, and yet it was always something that for me was so natural and fresh in my mind in terms of how things function. I had taken this photograph of this spider web early in the morning in Chile, in Patagonia, and for me it really represents this saying, in that whenever something happens somewhere to someone or to an ecosystem, to a river, to an animal, it reverberates everywhere. And everything we have and everything we do is connected to somewhere else, to somebody else, to some mineral, to some plant. And I feel that if we really start to think that way, then the stories of other people become our stories, and we become more empathetic to what's happening in the world. So as I come from a background of documentary filmmakers, but as I have a psychology background, I'm always trying to see how we can share this kind of messaging with people to really reconnect with ourselves, with others, and with nature. I've spent most of my life working on the others and nature part, and I'm now transitioning to focusing a lot more on how do we reconnect with self and our consciousness and our understanding of self in the world. If we can go to the next slide, that would be wonderful. Um, this um, this for me represents all of us, because I think that we are all connected with emotions and with joy, with laughter and with fun, with our childhoods. And if we can bring ourselves back to those moments, then I think we come back to something that's very basic of what it means to be human on this planet. The Jarari territory, if we go to the next photograph, please. The Jarari territory is there in bright green, just at the tri-border area. It's in Brazil. It's at the tri-border area with Peru and Colombia. It's 85,000 square kilometers, which is about the size of Portugal, Austria, or in the United States, the state of Maine. 85,000 square kilometers is really massive, and it's jungle and very difficult of access. That's the second largest indigenous territory in Brazil. There are about 7,000 individuals there, 5,000 of whom live within contacted tribes, and about 2,000 in isolated or uncontacted tribes, which are living in voluntary isolation, not involuntary, of their own choosing. This is the largest concentration of uncontacted peoples in the entire Amazon that are living in this territory. And those who have come into contact with the outside world know what the potential dangers are of that contact. Back in the 16th century, it was the time of colonizers coming in from Europe and pillaging and stealing and enslaving. They brought in diseases. Those diseases have decimated a lot of the populations. These isolated communities are very much as vulnerable as they were in the 16th century, because they haven't come into anything, into contact with anything so much as a cold or the flu. So we don't go into those territories. And if you have an opportunity to see my film, it's called Tribes on the Edge. If we can go to the next slide, you'll see the full story of everything I'm talking about. But it's hard to talk about people who are uncontacted, whom can't express their stories to you, but we do so through the contacted people. If you can go to the next slide. Tribes on the Edge was filmed over the course of 3 years, and it was filmed at the request of the Indigenous people who asked me to tell their story to the world. When I was there, now I'm going back to 2006 and 7 with my father, filming Return to the Amazon, going back to places my grandfather had been to. That's when I first went into the Jarari territory to bring this production team in to go back to where my grandfather had been to. And we were invited to attend a conference of the contacted peoples. And at the time we were there, they were talking about health issues. And that's when I found out they have a rate, 50 to 80% rate of hepatitis, A, B, C, and Delta, Obviously, there's malaria, but the amount and the frequency of malaria is quite staggering. And I knew I wanted to do something more than just that one scene in a film. It was in 2010 that Beto from the Marubo tribe contacted me and said, "We want you to tell the world we exist. We want you to tell our story." And so I said yes, not really knowing how I was going to do that and what my role was as a storyteller in the way in which that story would be transmitted. But I knew that I needed to do something more. I started filming in 2013 and went on 3 total expeditions over the course of those 3 years. And the film was done completely independently, which sometimes is completely unsustainable. But I didn't want to sell the story before finishing because I wanted to honor their trust in me to translate that story to the outside world. And so in doing that, it was a much longer process than perhaps selling the film beforehand, because I've already done documentaries and I've seen that what you film in the field, the stories that people tell you and the stories you capture and how you envision telling those stories changes completely in the editing room. And as a producer and director on this film, and as the person they trusted, I didn't want to hand 100 hours of footage over to have it collaged together to be more entertaining or more palatable for an audience. I wanted it to be raw. I wanted it to be real, and I wanted it to be in their voices. So 2013, and the film just came out in the United States in February of this year. The real in the US, international, we're still negotiating. The real test for me was bringing the film back to the communities, which we were able to do in November 2019. And we went to the border town of Atalaya and showed them the film. And that for me, we entered a lot of film festivals, and I'll be very candid, we were rejected from a lot of film festivals because it's not a very typical film. And none of those rejections meant anything as long as the people that I made this story for and about felt that I did so in a way that was just and honest and authentic. And it was really scary to bring the story back and to watch their faces as they watched themselves interpreted through the eyes of a white Westerner who needs to bring the message to an audience so they understand it. If you can go to the next slide, please. These are the people I work for. These are my bosses. This is how I refer to my work. Is I feel that if I feel I'm doing it right, it's because I feel that they will respond. So they will say, yes, we agree. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to go back since then, but we have other work happening. We're doing an education program with the College of William and Mary. We're doing action initiatives, and we've created a nonprofit organization to bring support back to those communities. I want to show you a couple of excerpts from the film. The first one is a gentleman named Beto Borges, who is with an organization called Forest Trends. And I feel that this message really plays back to the history of exploitation and colonialism around the world, not just in this territory. Could you play the clip number 1, please? And we'll hope that the sound will catch
The
up.
exploitation of indigenous land for natural resources is nothing new. In fact, it goes back centuries when European invaders first made contact.
It's really important for us to learn from our mistakes, right? It's really important for us to learn from history. In Brazil, what happened in elsewhere in Latin America, the Spaniards came, they took over the Inca Empire. Why? Because of gold. Later on, Cabral came to Brazil in the 1500s, the explorers that would just keep pillaging indigenous peoples, slaving them to work for them. And that's what led to the exodus of the indigenous peoples that lived in the coast of Brazil and elsewhere in Latin America to areas that are considered remote.
Following the gold era, some indigenous populations declined by 90% because of diseases brought in by outsiders. From the mid-1850s to the end of the 20th century, rubber tappers invaded the Amazon, feeding the North American and European demand.
Greed is what has driven the invasion of other people's lands over the course of human history, to take what is not of our own, killing in the name of profit. And that's still what's happening today. The current paradigm of agribusiness development is really leading the deforestation that is taking place in the Amazon. In the past 30 years, we've lost 17% of the Brazilian Amazon, mostly driven by cattle ranching, soy production, palm oil, and logging.
We take their land, oil, gold, fish, timber, minerals, without thinking about the consequences.
Do mundo branco, a gente vê que as coisas a gente vê na televisão, a gente vê o mundo assim fora, e vê muita coisa bom, né? Mas bom mesmo que nós vivemos aqui é mais boa ainda.
So that just gives you a small glimpse, and I'll show 3 more clips during this session. There are beautiful moments in spending time there. You know, I mean, a lot of what we show in the film are the difficulties, and because that's what we're there for. We're there to share that message, the message that is quite difficult, and that is of death, of disease, of dying, of fighting for your life and your territory. But there are also beautiful moments of that don't all make it into the film. 100 hours has to be condensed into 78 minutes. But life, like this little girl walking across the way. And I think it's really important in difficult stories to also uplift. And that's what we tried to do at Moments. And it was interesting seeing the audience when I brought this film back to them, the parts that they would laugh at. And it was nice to hear that within the difficulty of the story, they were actually also able to see the happiness within it. This next clip is from Armando from the Marubo tribe. The Marubo tribe are, as I said, one of the contacted tribes there. There were 5 at the time we were filming. There are now 6. The Karubo were in transition of contact when we started filming, so you won't see them on camera. But Armando from the Marubo tribe talks very clearly about the health issues, including malaria, and hepatitis, which are 2 projects that we're looking at working on with natural medicine. If you could play that second one, clip number 4, that would be great. Thank you.
Armando is the second son of the chief, and in the chief's absence, he represents his village.
Que eu sou agente de saúde daqui do Rio Novo, da aldeia. E as doenças, muitas assim, que acontecem nessa comunidade, assim, a toda a comunidade do Vale do Jarari, que acontece, muitos parentes morrem com hepatite. Morreram 4 pessoas no mesmo tempo. Um dia, outro dia aconteceu. Depois que fizeram o exame, descobriram que era hepatite, né? Muitas, assim, malária. Muita malária. Um ano e 6 meses.
1 ano e 6 meses já.
4 malária.
4 malária.
4 casos de malária.
E o menino está recuperando.
Tá recuperando, já tá cansado, fica fraco. Ela já teve muitas malárias. Ele não se encontra
E não
mais
sabe quantas.
Muita malária. 12 anos, quando ela tinha 12 anos, teve malária, quase que ela não ficava paralisada.
The malaria pathogen originated in Africa and arrived in the Americas in the 16th century when European settlers and the West African slaves they brought sailed across the Atlantic. As for the virulent spread of hepatitis in the Jarari, there are two theories. The first is that it originated in the Peruvian side of the Peru-Brazil border. In Peru, many indigenous peoples are not protected from outsiders, which include drug traffickers, gold miners, and loggers. When they cross the river into Brazil to visit other tribal members, they may have brought hepatitis with them into the Jarari. The second explanation is controversial, a conspiracy theory that is gaining momentum, that the Brazilian government knowingly infected members of the tribes of the Jarari to remove them from the land. Understanding that demarcated indigenous territories are protected from outsiders as long as there are tribal members living there, it's no wonder that indigenous people are convinced that they are being systematically exterminated to unlock the rainforest for agribusiness and resource extraction worth billions. Whether or not this is true, the fact that many in the Jarari believe it only exacerbates the feeling of distrust.
So that gives you a little bit of a glimpse, and I see somebody wrote, speaking of parallels, yes, definite parallels on so many different levels. And you know, the role of a storyteller and a filmmaker, a lot of people think should be somewhat objective. It's very hard for me to be objective in all of these stories, but I tried as much as possible to really have them tell their own stories, and that if there was any doubt on how something happened, that doubt had to be shared as well. Could we go to the next slide, please? What you'll see now is coming up is a map of a section of the Amazon. It's not the territory where I'm working. You might be able to see small the city of Santarém, which gives you a little bit of an idea of where in Brazil it is and where on the Amazon River. But everything in pink is deforestation from palm oil, just from the one crop. And this is where I go back to that first slide and this notion of interconnectedness. And if you pull at a thread, it's connected to everything on the planet. When I share these stories with kids, I just say, just go into your kitchen cabinets and pull out everything and look at and see where there's palm oil. Because where there's palm oil, there's deforestation, which means if there's anything palm oil in what we eat, we're connected to that. So it's a very simple way for people to understand through our food systems that we are part of that problem, which means we can be part of the solution. Can you go to the next slide, please? What you see here spans across Brazil and into neighboring countries, but everything that is in orange is indigenous land. Now, the laws that protect indigenous land are different from country to country, but in Brazil, indigenous territory cannot be exploited. That is, except for what's underneath the surface. So there's always loopholes to the protection of these lands, these territories, and people's rights. The Jarari territory, I don't know if you can, the Jarari territory it kind of looks like a little turtle, and it's, again, the second largest territory in Brazil, has all kinds of illegal activities that are menacing it. From the western border and along the northern border is a drug route. So there's no drug trafficking inside the indigenous territory of the Jarari, but the river itself is being used for transportation. And that goes from the western border through the northern border and then along and out the Amazon. To the south, there is on the outside encroaching agriculture and cattle farming. So that land and the deforestation of that land is gaining momentum towards the southern border of the Jarari territory. On the east side of the Jarari territory, you have illegal gold miners coming in, and they're actually coming into the indigenous land itself. It is, again, very isolated land. So you have these small platforms, gold mining platforms that are coming in. They're dredging up the rivers, they're destroying the land, and they're putting mercury into the rivers. From the north, you have illegal hunting and fishing happening because you have the tri-border city of Tabatinga Leticia, which is across Brazil and Colombia. And so that's a major city of trade and sale. So a lot of the illegal hunting and fishing stays rather local or regional, doesn't get exported out. But the gold does, and so does the soy, and so does the palm oil, and so does the beef, and so do the drugs that are being trafficked around the territory. So beyond any legal system that needs to be fixed to better protect the indigenous land and the people themselves, there are all these illegal activities happening that are menacing the biodiversity and obviously human life. So it's quite a complex place to be working in. One thing that we have looked at working with the indigenous people is an analysis of the biodiversity and the threats to that biodiversity. So we can make a case with full data and understanding of what's there and what is threatening that biodiversity, which includes human life. I'm going to skip to something positive because I think we all need it. The next clip you're going to see is from a man named Adauto from the Kulina tribe. Adauto is the youngest of, I believe, 9 children. His mother, who you will see in this clip, is still extraordinarily active. She fishes for herself, and she found herself a younger husband in his 30s to help with the house. And he had been telling me the story about how his own peoples were almost disappeared at the hands of another one of the tribes. But that nowadays, there's reconciliation against a common, we're going to call it an enemy in a general way because of all of the menacing activities around their land and the government itself. So this is Adauto. He is the face of, as well, on our poster for the film, because for me it was really important to show that his people who almost disappeared are rising back up again. So can you show clip number 7, please?
But a movement is growing. A unified effort between energetic indigenous youth and stalwart elders who remember traditional ways. It is a powerful alliance.
Eu fui criança ainda para a cidade, né? Estudar. E eu falei que meu sonho era de estudar, terminar meu estudo, fazer meu técnico e vir para a aldeia trabalhar junto com eles. Esse é o meu sonho que eu tenho, né? Desde pequeno eu tive isso. A gente quer novas lideranças que estão surgindo agora, né? Os meninos. E queremos representante na CESAI, que a gente não tem. Queremos na FUNAI, também não tem. Queremos capacitação para a gente trabalhar na base, junto com a FUNAI. E com a minha mãe, com certeza, a gente junto, né? A gente está caminhando nessa batalha, mas ela. E eu tenho certeza que a gente vai recuperar a nossa cultura de novo.
dá para bastante. Então, nós temos 30 mais 9 unidades de dezena e uma unidade de altura.
So that's just a small glimpse of Adato, and his whole story is there in the film as well. Can you just go to the next image so we have the next one on? You know, something that that for me keeps me hopeful whenever I get into this place of feeling like the task is too big and there's just so much to do. And Beto, who originally was the one to send me a message and ask me to tell their story, has become a bit like a little brother to me. He's come to my home when I was living in New York several times. We brought him to the Indigenous Forum at the United Nations a few years in a row. We taught him how to fly a drone so he could help survey the land. And every now and then I'll send him a WhatsApp and I'm like, oh, Beto, you know, what's going on with COVID? What's going on with this? What more can I do? What more can I do? And he writes me back. He goes, Céline, calma. He says, this problem did not happen overnight. You by yourself won't solve it overnight. You need to be here for the long run. He's like, so take a deep breath and start again. And it's amazing to me how somebody who is afraid his people are going to go extinct can be such a calm mentor, because he knows what he needs to do. He knows that we need to see 7 generations ahead, because that's the only way we're going to survive. And he tells me, he says, you know, my generation will disappear. This is not who I'm doing it for. It's for those that come after me. And so I hope to remind all of us that that's what this is about, is that it is about the next generations, and that regardless of how heavy things might be or how difficult they might be, if you're making a positive difference, it matters. Patty Webster runs a small organization in Peru bringing medical attention to remote communities, and she gave me the same wise advice. She says, you know, I said, how can you keep doing this work when there's so much more to do? It just seems overwhelming. And she says, you know, if I'm helping one person, 30 people or 100 people, at least I'm doing something. So I'd like to show this last clip, and again, Beto Borges and his wise words. If you could pass clip number 6, I think this will speak to all of us, I hope.
We can't change history. We can't change the past, but we can make a better future by knowing our own past, what we've done, what we could have done differently, how we feel about it, and how we act on it today based on what the past teaches us.
Essas terras indígenas se destinam, o povo que vive ali possa continuar a sua vida tradicional, porque eles nunca destruíram o meio ambiente. Os homens hoje raciocinam com o bolso. É com o dinheiro que eles raciocinam. Não há mais sentimento de amor à terra, de preservação, do cuidado que nós temos que ter com o outro, exterminar o meio ambiente. É lamentável que a gente veio viver e estamos vivendo uma época dessa, né? É muito ruim. Mas, enfim, temos que combater isso e não desanimar.
And I think with those words, to not lose hope, to not lose heart is where we need to remind ourselves where we get our energy and how we move forward.
Again, thank you so much, Céline.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Have a good health break.
Yeah!